The UHS Redemption was a joke. A rusted, outdated battleship barely held together by patchwork repairs, it was considered an embarrassment to the United Human Systems Navy. It wasn't fast, wasn't armed well, and had a shield system so fragile that a stiff breeze could probably disable it. Among the galactic fleets, it was a running gag. The Zelvari Imperium called it a floating graveyard. The Valaran Republic referred to it as a flying scrapyard. Even their supposed allies, the Tari Coalition, chuckled at the mere mention of its name. For years, it had been ignored, left to patrol useless backwater sectors where nothing of importance ever happened. Its crew? A mix of rejects, washouts, and those who had nowhere else to go. That changed when Captain Elias Rourke took command. Rourke was an old war dog, a veteran of the Second Galactic Conflict, known for pulling off the impossible. Some said he was a tactical genius, others claimed he was just a madman who refused to die. Either way, he wasn't the type to accept failure, especially not when he was handed what was supposed to be a punishment assignment. "Listen up, you miserable lot," he said during his first address to the crew. "The brass thinks we're useless. The galaxy thinks we're a joke. But I've got a simple rule. If they underestimate you, you make them regret it." The Redemption would no longer be the weakest ship in the fleet. It would become something far worse. The crew of the UHS Redemption wasn't used to discipline. Most of them had been shoved here because they were either screw-ups, misfits, or just plain unlucky. But Captain Elias Rourke? He wasn't having it. The first thing he did was rip the rank structure to shreds. "You're not officers. You're not enlisted. You're survivors," he growled during the first briefing. "And if you want to keep surviving, you'll listen to me. We're not playing by the rule book anymore." There was no ceremony, no niceties, just immediate, brutal training. He forced them to drill constantly, running combat scenarios, engineering repairs, and emergency procedures until they could do them in their sleep. Some grumbled, but after the first week, when he made it clear that incompetence would get them spaced, the complaints stopped. Then came the modifications. The Redemption had been weak, yes, but it wasn't completely useless. It had something no one paid attention to, a massive empty cargo bay. "Tell me, Chief," Rourke said, turning to the ship's chief engineer, Petra Vasquez. "How much explosive material do you think we can fit in that cargo bay?" Vasquez, a genius who'd been dishonorably discharged from 3 other ships, gave a slow grin. "Enough to turn this thing into a bomb the size of a small moon." That was the first step. The second? Electronic warfare. Lieutenant Jonah Briggs had been an expert hacker before getting court-martialed for unauthorized system modifications, which was military speak for hacking the Admiral's private comms. When Rourke found him, he was assigned to waste duty. "You know what this ship lacks, Briggs?" Rourke asked. Briggs gave him a deadpan look. "Everything." "Wrong. It lacks fear, and we're going to fix that." Over the next few weeks, they turned the Redemption into something monstrous. They ripped out non-essential systems and tripled the ECM suite, turning the ship into a ghost that could scramble enemy targeting. They gutted life support redundancies to make room for automated drone launchers. They rigged the ship's reactor to overload on command, meaning they could make it look like the Redemption was always on the verge of self-destruction. And the biggest change? The ship's main guns had been weak, barely capable of damaging enemy capital ships. So instead of trying to fight fair, Rourke and his engineers jury-rigged missile tubes designed for planetary bombardment onto the Redemption's hull. Now, instead of standard torpedoes, the ship could fire dirty, unstable munitions, salvaged from old wrecks, modified to bypass shields, and cause absolute chaos inside enemy hulls. The crew took to calling them Reapers. By the time the modifications were done, The UHS Redemption was no longer just a weak battleship. It was a floating death trap designed to break every rule of warfare, and soon the galaxy would learn just how dangerous an underestimated human ship could be. The UHS Redemption had spent years being ignored. No one in the fleet expected anything from it. No one even bothered keeping track of its movements, which made it the perfect weapon for an ambush. Captain Elias Rourke stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display. The Zelvari Imperium had been making quiet incursions into human space, testing the borders, picking off supply ships, and retreating before the main fleet could respond. They were cowards, relying on their superior technology to hit and run. But tonight, they weren't going to escape. "Sir," Briggs said from the sensor station, "we've got movement on long-range scans. 3 Zelvari ships, 1 destroyer, 2 frigates. They're heading for the Theta 9 supply convoy." Rourke grinned. "Perfect. Helm, bring us into position. Silent running." The Redemption had no chance in a fair fight. That was fine. Fair fights were for dead men. They had stripped the ship down, turning it into a ghost. With the ECM systems running at full power, they slipped through the darkness of space, invisible to standard sensors. The enemy ships were focused on their prize, the unarmed human convoy. They didn't even register the Redemption's approach. Rourke turned to Vasquez. "Are the Reapers ready?" She smirked. "Oh, they're ready, Captain. I've been dying to see these bastards in action." "Good." He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire them straight into their engines." The Redemption lurched as the first volley of modified torpedoes launched into the void. A moment of silence. Then, impact. The lead Zelvari destroyer shuddered violently as 2 of the Reapers tore through its shields. These weren't ordinary torpedoes. The modified warheads bypassed energy barriers, burrowing deep into the ship's hull before detonating in an unstable, chaotic mess. 1 second, the destroyer was leading the attack. The next, its entire rear section was gone, venting fire and bodies into space. The Zelvari fleet panicked. Their carefully planned raid had just turned into a nightmare. The 2 enemy frigates desperately tried to respond, scanning for the attacker, only to find nothing. The Redemption's electronic warfare systems had already scrambled their sensors. To them, it looked like the torpedoes had come from nowhere. That was when the drones hit. Jonah Briggs had been busy. He'd reprogrammed the automated combat drones to act erratically, darting through enemy formations like rabid animals, jamming comms, spitting out false sensor readings, and blasting away at their hulls in unpredictable patterns. To the Zelvari, it looked like they were under attack from a dozen ghost ships. The enemy frigates opened fire wildly, trying to hit something, anything, but their targeting systems were useless. Their shots hit nothing but empty space, and then Rourke gave the final order. "Charge the reactor." A deep, ominous hum filled the Redemption as its systems overloaded, deliberately. Warning lights flashed across the bridge. Any normal crew would be panicking, but Rourke's crew knew the plan. The Redemption had been rigged to look like a dying ship on the verge of catastrophic failure. Energy spikes screamed across enemy sensors. To the Zelvari, it seemed like the human vessel was about to explode in a blast big enough to take them all with it. The enemy frigates hesitated, and in battle, hesitation meant death. The Redemption fired one last salvo, 3 more Reapers, straight into the second frigate's bridge. It vanished in a ball of fire. The last Zelvari ship, now utterly terrified, turned tail and fled. A human patrol arrived 15 minutes later, expecting to find the convoy destroyed. Instead, they found the wreckage of 2 Zelvari warships, and the weakest ship in the fleet, floating silently, its hull still glowing from reactor overcharge. The legend of the Redemption had just begun. and the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. The destruction of the Zelvari raiding party should have been a minor event, a small skirmish forgotten in the chaos of war. But it wasn't. The Zelvari Imperium had never lost ships to a lone human vessel before. And yet, here were 2 of their warships, reduced to drifting wreckage, with no clear explanation for how it had happened. Survivors from the escaping frigate reported impossible things: phantom attacks, sensor ghosts, torpedoes that appeared from nowhere, and a human ship that should have been dead, but refused to die. In the high halls of the Imperium's War Council, the incident was discussed in hushed tones. These humans, they were supposed to be primitive, inefficient. Perhaps this is an anomaly, a malfunction in our ship's systems? Something happened out there. The humans are hiding something. The Redemption's name was now spoken with fear in Zelvari war circles. But for the humans, it was still a joke. Back at the United Human Systems headquarters, Admiral Tobias Vale reviewed the battle report with a skeptical eye. This has to be a mistake. He turned to his intelligence officer. Are we really supposed to believe that one half-scrapped destroyer took down 2 Zelvari warships without a scratch? The officer hesitated. Sir, I've seen the data. The Zelvari fleet reported extreme ECM interference. Their comms were jammed. Their targeting systems were scrambled beyond recognition. And the Redemption's weapons, they weren't standard torpedoes. Vale frowned. You're saying this wasn't just luck? I'm saying, the officer replied. Someone on that ship turned a flying scrapyard into a monster. The Admiral leaned back, exhaling slowly. If this was true, it changed everything. For years, humanity had fought as the underdogs, always outmatched by the superior technology of the galactic empires. If one ship, had found a way to level the playing field, even just for a moment, it meant there was potential for something much, much bigger. Where's the Redemption now? Vale asked. Back in deep space, sir. No one's keeping track of them. The Admiral grinned. Good. Let's keep it that way. Rourke sat in his command chair, watching as his crew celebrated their first victory. It was a quiet victory, away from the eyes of the main fleet. But it mattered. For the first time, the crew of the weakest ship in the fleet had tasted real power. They weren't running anymore. They were hunting. Petra Vasquez clinked a metal cup against Rourke's. To making the bastards afraid of the dark, Rourke smirked. To making them regret ever underestimating us. In the shadows of deep space, the Redemption vanished once more. Its next target was waiting. The Zelvari weren't fools. They had ruled the stars for centuries, crushing countless civilizations that dared challenge them. A single skirmish, no matter how bizarre, wouldn't make them run. No, they wanted revenge. The Redemption had embarrassed them, and the Imperium did not tolerate humiliation. The Zelvari War Council declared the ship a priority target, dispatching a squadron to hunt it down. 5 warships, 3 cruisers, 2 destroyers, set a trap near Vorlis 7, an uninhabited system known for its massive asteroid fields. The idea was simple. Bait the humans into attacking a fake supply convoy and then spring the trap. To them, the outcome was inevitable. A primitive human ship couldn't possibly outmaneuver a Zelvari strike force. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Jonah Briggs sat at the sensor station, frowning at the data streaming in. Captain, I don't like this. Rourke took a sip of his coffee. Talk to me. Briggs pointed at the tactical screen. We've been tracking Zelvari supply routes for weeks. This convoy, it's too exposed. No escorts, no decoys. Either they've suddenly started getting sloppy, or they want us to take the bait, Rourke finished, nodding. Vasquez smirked. Guess that means we're taking the bait. Rourke grinned. Oh, we're taking it, but on our terms. Over the next 6 hours, the crew of the Redemption worked in silence, preparing for what was coming. They didn't avoid the trap. They set their own. The Zelvari squadron waited in the asteroid field, their ships running cold to mask their energy signatures. Their crews were confident, ready to crush the pathetic human ship the moment it showed itself. Then, without warning, their systems went dark. Alarms blared across the lead cruiser's bridge as targeting sensors scrambled, comms collapsed, and their navigational grid flooded with false data. "The humans!" the Zelvari captain snarled. "They're jamming us!" A heartbeat later, Reapers tore through the void. The first torpedo struck one of the destroyers, punching through its shields before detonating inside its primary reactor. The explosion ripped the ship apart, sending debris spiraling into the asteroid belt. The second destroyer tried to evade, but its targeting systems were still blind. It fired wildly into space, hitting nothing. Then the Redemption appeared, not on sensors, not on their tactical readouts. It emerged from the darkness like a phantom, silent and cold, its reactor still in a false overload state. To the Zelvari, it looked like a dying ship on its last legs, until it unleashed hell. Heavy railgun fire pounded into the second destroyer's exposed hull, tearing through armor like paper. It tried to return fire, but every targeting attempt was met with another wave of jamming. By the time its captain managed to scream a final order, the ship was already burning. 2 down, 3 left. The Zelvari cruisers turned, trying to bring their superior firepower to bear. But that was their mistake. Briggs had been waiting. The moment their engines flared, he activated the second phase of the plan. Dozens of hacked mining drones, previously lying dormant inside the asteroid belt, came to life. To the Zelvari, it looked like a swarm of incoming hostiles. Their AI panicked, wasting precious seconds trying to lock onto ghost targets. In those seconds, the Redemption struck again. 2 more torpedoes, 2 more direct hits. The first cruiser lost its bridge in a single fiery blast. The second spun out of control, colliding with a massive asteroid in a brilliant explosion. The last remaining Zelvari ship, its commander paralyzed by fear, fled the battlefield. The Redemption didn't chase. They didn't need to. The message had been sent. The crew watched the wreckage burn in the distance. 5 enemy ships had entered the system. 1 had survived. Vasquez whistled. "Think they'll keep underestimating us now?" Rourke chuckled. "Not a chance." Briggs leaned back in his chair. "So, what now?" Rourke took a deep breath, looking at the star map. "Now? We stop running." The Redemption was no longer just a rogue warship. It was a legend in the making. And the galaxy was finally starting to understand the nightmare it had unleashed. Word of the Battle of Vorlis 7 spread faster than the wreckage had cooled. The Zelvari Imperium refused to officially acknowledge the loss. Their pride wouldn't allow it. But whispers slipped through their ranks like a plague. Entire squadrons began refusing assignments near human space. Zelvari captains started demanding triple the usual escort forces for even the smallest patrols. They didn't know what the Redemption was exactly. Some reports claimed it was a ghost ship, manned by the dead. Others insisted it was experimental human technology, a prototype that could vanish at will. The most terrified believed it was something worse, a weapon of war born from pure human desperation. For the first time in history, humanity was the nightmare. Captain Elias Rourke knew fear was the best weapon in their arsenal. "Let them believe whatever they want," he told his crew. "As long as they're afraid, we control the battlefield." But something was bothering him. For weeks, the Redemption had been striking at isolated enemy forces, picking off Zelvari supply routes and ambushing their patrols. They had left a trail of wreckage and whispers in their wake. And yet, no retaliation. The Imperium wasn't stupid. They had more resources, more ships, more firepower. So where was the counterattack? Jonah Briggs, the ship's cyber warfare expert, was the first to find the answer. "Captain," he said one night, pulling up a data feed on the main display. "I've been listening in on intercepted Zelvari comms. Most of it is encrypted garbage, but I caught something strange." The screen flickered, showing a grainy holographic projection of a Zelvari admiral addressing his officers. "We will not waste resources chasing a ghost," the alien growled. "Let them have their petty victories. The humans believe they are predators now, but soon they will learn their place." Then the transmission cut. Rourke's jaw tightened. "They're planning something." Vasquez crossed her arms. "Of course they are. We've been embarrassing them for months. They want us to think we're winning until we walk into a slaughter." Briggs nodded grimly. "They're luring us in, letting us build up confidence before they drop the hammer." Rourke exhaled slowly. "Then we need to move first." For too long, they had been hunting scraps, taking out small Zelvari forces while the larger fleet regrouped. If the Imperium was planning a major counterattack, they couldn't afford to wait for it. They needed to strike somewhere big, somewhere that would shatter Zelvari morale, somewhere they weren't supposed to survive. After 3 sleepless days of planning, the target became clear. Fortress A-196. A massive, heavily defended Zelvari command station on the edge of their controlled space. It served as a critical refueling point for their warships, supplying their front lines against humanity. Taking it out would be impossible for any normal human fleet. The defenses were overwhelming, with layered shields, orbital gun platforms, and enough firepower to turn an entire planet into dust. But the Redemption wasn't a normal human fleet. Rourke stood in front of his crew, staring into their hardened faces. They weren't misfits anymore. They were soldiers, killers, legends. "We've spent months picking them apart, making them scared of the dark," he said. "Now, we burn their fear into their bones. No fleet, no reinforcements, just us. A lone, dying ship, doing the impossible." Vasquez grinned. "I like those odds." Briggs exhaled sharply. "We're insane." Then he smirked. "Let's do it." The Redemption turned toward Zelvari space, its engines burning hotter than ever. The next battle wouldn't be another ambush. It would be war. And when it was over, the galaxy would never be the same. The UHS Redemption drifted through the void, silent as a graveyard. Ahead of them, Fortress A-196 loomed, a massive Zelvari command station, bristling with turrets, shield generators, and hangars filled with enemy fighters. A structure designed to withstand entire human fleets. And the weakest ship in the fleet was about to take it on alone. Rourke exhaled slowly, staring at the monstrous station from the bridge. Every logical part of his mind told him this was suicide. And that's why it would work. "They don't see us as a threat," he muttered. "They won't take us seriously until it's too late." Vasquez cracked her knuckles. "So how do we crack this fortress?" Briggs grinned. "We make them blind, deaf, and stupid. Step 1. Shut down their ability to see the attack coming." Briggs had been working for days, crafting an AI-driven cyber attack that would slip through the cracks in the Zelvari network. It activated precisely 3 seconds before the Redemption fired its first shot. Across Fortress A-196, sensors flickered and died. Targeting systems froze. Communication relays went silent. For 60 seconds, the fortress was blind. And in those 60 seconds, the Redemption struck. 6 Reaper torpedoes tore through space, heading straight for the shield generators. Each torpedo had been designed to detonate mid-flight, spreading electromagnetic chaos before impact. The first 3 torpedoes slammed into the fortress's outer defenses, overloading the shield generators. The station's protective barrier flickered for a fraction of a second. and a fraction of a second was all Rourke needed. "Vasquez," he barked, "fire everything." The Redemption unleashed hell. Railgun rounds tore into the exposed sections of the station. Salvaged nuclear warheads, illegally modified by Vasquez, detonated deep inside the main reactor bay. The fortress shuddered. Internal explosions rippled through its hull. Now the Zelvari were awake. Gun platforms turned toward the Redemption, spewing red-hot plasma. Enemy fighters scrambled from their hangars, streaking toward the lone human vessel like a swarm of angry wasps. But it was already too late. The Redemption did exactly what the Zelvari expected it to do. It fled. Its engines flared wildly, its trajectory erratic, as if it had taken too much damage and was barely holding together. The Zelvari commander, still recovering from the shock of the initial attack, made a fatal mistake. He ordered his fleet to pursue. Half of the fortress's remaining forces broke formation, giving chase, leaving the station exposed. And that was when the real nightmare began. Briggs activated Phase 2 of the cyber attack, a series of delayed hacking protocols previously injected into the station's systems, activated in perfect sequence. Hangar doors slammed shut, trapping hundreds of fighters inside. Power grids fluctuated, shutting down weapons at random. Automated defenses turned on their own troops. And deep inside the station, where the nuclear warheads had detonated earlier, a final catastrophic chain reaction began. The Zelvari commander realized the trap too late. A single, frantic transmission made it out before the station vanished in fire and wreckage. "The humans!" he screamed. "The humans have turned their own weakness into a—" Transmission lost. The crew watched in silence as the Zelvari's greatest fortress was torn apart from the inside out. One ship had done this. They had crippled a war machine that had stood for decades. Vasquez let out a slow, stunned laugh. We just took out an entire command station." Briggs leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "That wasn't a battle." "No," Rourke agreed, watching the wreckage drift. "That was a warning." The Redemption had just declared war. And now? The Zelvari had no choice but to acknowledge it. The moment news reached the Zelvari High Command, panic spread through the Imperium. This wasn't just another human raid. This wasn't a small-scale skirmish. This was terror, psychological warfare, a single ship tearing through their ranks like a ghost. And the worst part? They had no idea how to stop it. The Imperium sent a single transmission to the United Human Systems. A simple, chilling message. "Surrender the UHS Redemption to us, or we will burn every human colony to the ground." The war had just escalated. And Rourke? He wasn't backing down. The message from the Zelvari Imperium hung in the air like a noose. "Surrender the UHS Redemption to us, or we will burn every human colony to the ground." The United Human Systems had a choice. The Redemption had gone from being a forgotten relic to the most feared ship in the galaxy. It had struck deep into the heart of the Zelvari war machine, and now the Imperium was lashing out in desperation. Some in the UHS command wanted to sacrifice the ship. "This is too much attention," one admiral argued. "We're barely holding our borders as it is. If we hand over the ship, we might buy ourselves time." But others, those who had spent years fighting against Zelvari oppression, knew better. "You don't negotiate with a wounded predator," Admiral Tobias Vale said grimly. "They want to make an example of us. If we give them the Redemption, they won't stop. They'll just keep taking." So the decision was made. Humanity wouldn't surrender. And in response, the Zelvari kept their promise. It started on the colony of New Doran, one of the outermost human settlements, lightly defended and home to nearly 2 million civilians. The Zelvari fleet arrived in force, not to conquer, but to annihilate. They came without warning. They didn't send demands. They didn't offer surrender. They burned everything. Orbital bombardments turned cities to dust. Refugee ships were shot down as they tried to escape. The Zelvari left nothing but silence in their wake. The message was clear. Give us the redemption or this will happen again. And then it did. One by one, human colonies fell under fire. Now, it wasn't just a war. It was genocide. The crew listened in silence as the reports poured in. Millions dead. Entire cities wiped from existence. The people who had once mocked the redemption were now begging for it to save them. For the first time since Rourke had taken command, there was no celebration, no smug satisfaction at their victories. There was only rage. Vasquez slammed her fist into a table. They're slaughtering civilians because they can't kill us in a fair fight. Briggs's voice was cold. They're scared of us. Rourke exhaled slowly, staring at the holomap. His fingers tightened into a fist. This is our fault, he muttered. Vasquez shot him a glare. Number, this is their fault. They started this war. They thought they could walk all over us. They thought humanity was weak. She looked at him, fire in her eyes. Let's show them how wrong they were. Rourke nodded. Yeah. His voice was quiet. Yeah, we will. Then he turned to his crew. The Zelvari want us so badly. His eyes were like steel. Let's make sure they never forget us. For months, the Redemption had been hunting small targets, picking off patrols, raiding convoys, ambushing warships in deep space. Now, they were going to take everything. The Redemption went dark. It disappeared into the void, slipping past Zelvari patrols like a ghost. No transmissions, no detectable energy signatures. The Imperium scrambled to locate it, but the ship was already moving. And when it struck, it did so without mercy. Zelvari war factories vanished in nuclear fire. Shipyards were hacked and turned against their own fleet. Key supply lines were cut off, starving their military. The Zelvari thought they understood war, but humans understood vengeance. The Zelvari war machine began to crack. For centuries they had ruled through fear. They had believed themselves unstoppable. Now they were the ones afraid. Entire Zelvari squadrons deserted rather than face the Redemption. Their officers refused to engage human fleets, terrified that the ghost ship was waiting in the darkness. And then, the final blow came. The UHS Redemption didn't just attack the Imperium's war fleet. It attacked their homeworld. No one had ever dared to strike at the Zelvari capital itself. But the Redemption did. Aboard their world-spanning command center, the Zelvari High Emperor received a single transmission. The grainy image of Captain Elias Rourke. We could have been left alone, Rourke said, his voice deathly calm. We never wanted war. We never wanted to fight. He leaned forward. But now we'll make sure your kind never threatens humanity again. The transmission ended. And then, the skies above the Zelvari homeworld burned. The Redemption, the weakest ship in the fleet, had brought an empire to its knees. And the nightmare was finally over. The war ended, but the story of the Redemption did not. Some say the ship was lost after its final battle, drifting through space like a ghost, waiting for the day it would be needed again. Others claim Rourke and his crew vanished into the void, never to be seen again, because no one could stop what they had become. But one thing was certain. The weakest ship in the fleet had changed the fate of an entire galaxy, and the name Redemption would never be forgotten.